All right. Well, this is pretty exciting for me. This is the second time we've done this, just getting people from the Download Youth Ministry community together to talk about stuff that's relevant to them, to all of us. And I love when it comes together kind of organically. And we've got two people that started a conversation on the community board on Facebook, one of whom is now a published author. And that's a pretty exciting feat in my mind. And the other was kind of someone who's been reading this book or has picked up this book, is looking to read it. And I'm completely neutral in terms of this conversation. I haven't picked it up yet, but I'm excited to get a hold of it, because in my mind, the title alone kind of explains a lot of, what it's going to be about. But in my mind, it's one of those things that they don't often talk about in the whole pursuit of a degree, or when you first get into youth ministry, of one of those important things that you're going to need. So the book we're talking about is called People Skills for Youth Pastors, and the author is here, and his name is Trevor. Trevor, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. I appreciate you guys having me on board. And, the book just came out of exactly the situation like you're talking about, where I was out doing youth ministry and found myself completely unprepared to work with people. So that's what kind of gave rise to the idea for the book.
That's perfect. And Jerry, curious to hear your thoughts just on the initial part of it. How far into it are you, and what kind of caused you to grab this book and dive into it?
Well, I'm not into it at all quite yet. The whole issue of people skills and youth ministry seem on a common sense level to go hand in hand. And so I'm always intrigued when I see a conversation that pops up about the whole concept of, I'm in youth ministry, but I'm not really sure how to deal with people, which to me is that's like a dichotomy, So, Trevor, I'm excited to dig into this thing, and I'm excited to hear from your experience. And I've been in youth ministry for a good long time as well. And sure. I think just reading the title of the book, it made me think, oh man, I think I need to be a part of whatever conversation happens that comes along the lines of people skills. I'm by no means any kind of expert. I haven't arrived anywhere, but I think that I was just excited to have a conversation about the topic of people skills, because it's baffling, like I said, to me, that there are people in ministry who don't have those kinds of skills.
Yeah, yes. Jerry, you bring up a huge point. Sorry, go ahead, Trevor. Springboard off that.
That's fine. I remember back when I was in seminary, and there was a guy who came in and told us about the importance of learning people skills. Mm-hmm. And, of course, you're in class, you're kind of halfway tuned in, you're halfway tuned out. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those conversations, it's one of those days that I can look back on and say, I wish I had listened to that guy, and it would have saved me from a lot of headaches, through the years. And, I'm just like you, Jerry. I'm no expert in the topic. Fortunately, I think that there are some basic skills that, whether you're introverted or extroverted, you can pick them up, and, you might not be the greatest ever with people, but wherever you're at, you can pick up these skills and make some definite, clear improvements. Yeah. When you do, I think it translates into better ministry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trevor, let me ask you this. What was the turning point for you that kind of sparked, hey, maybe I'm not the only one that needs to consider how important people skills are? What sparked that and made you say, maybe there's some ideas that I can put down as a collection into this book that could help other youth ministry people out there?
I think for me, so I'm 34 right now, and I've been doing this for close to 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I know that where I am right now, the things that I know, the lessons that I've learned in ministry, you learn about them, and then you think, well, how can I pass these along to, the guys who are coming along kind of behind me, who maybe haven't had a chance to get, these kinds of opportunities and that sort of thing. And so I'm just kind of at that place in my ministry career where I think about me 10 years ago, moving to where I am now, in just south of Atlanta, Georgia, getting involved in kind of full-time student ministry. And the things that I've been able to learn and pick up have I didn't even know then what I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so here I am now. And so some of what I do, I coach different youth pastors. And so there's just been a lot of conversations through the years where there wasn't a book like this. And, I've got a reference in the People Skills for Youth Pastors book. I reference How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This is the little book that a guy gave me back in college. This is an incredibly boring read. It is terrible, but it's so valuable. And so what I found myself doing over and over was I recommend, this book to a different guy here or there, but then I'd be like, I have to qualify it with that same qualifier and say, it's such a boring read. Like, I really hope you can get through it because there's gold in there. And so eventually I just said, what if I can just create the resource and say, listen, here's what I've been trying to get across. And so that's really was the starting point of that book.
Mm-hmm. I love that winning friends and influencing people was such a huge part of this process for you, because it's a book that I'm familiar with and value. But like you said, it's a book that's generally written for people who have a business mind, who are maybe deep into the managerial field or the CEO field. And so to take
exactly right.
concepts and boil it down into, okay, what does that look like, and how does that translate into youth ministry, and how I work with students versus parents versus the elder board versus senior leadership versus the maintenance and facilities team, and those kinds of things are a big deal.
Yes, that's exactly right. Kind of in my background, I've got 5.5 years of management experience in a government contracting company that did different contracts with the Department of Defense. And you can get away with a lot of things in that kind of sector, in a business sector, that you can't get away with these things when you're working with volunteers, when you're representing Christ to these different people. Like, there's things that you just can't get away with. And so you've got to have a much better, a different kind of approach. You've got to, approach it as a servant instead of kind of a dictator. And also there's just leverage that you don't have. And so somebody said that there's really, when you're working with volunteers, it's probably the truest test of your actual leadership ability, because you don't have any leverage to hold over anybody's head. Yeah,
that's a huge pit hole that I found myself kind of digging deeper and deeper into, as well as my team in my ministry context is primarily volunteers. Jerry, you said something earlier, just how alarming it is to you, the dichotomy between those who get into youth ministry and yet don't seem to have some of those people skills. As you look at the landscape of maybe youth workers that you're involved with or familiar with, or have even heard stories of, what kind of strikes you kind of along that vein, or what are some of the things that you notice, like, man, these are specific areas where the development of people skills could really come in handy?
Yeah, I think an interesting thing that I observe are the variety of motivations that seem to be present in the different youth leaders that I meet in regards to getting involved in youth ministry at the first time. In the first place, there seems to be maybe like this, I don't know, one of them is like this romanticized view of some kind of rock star that you're going to be, and the crowds are going to swoon, and you're going to have this amazing platform and following. That's one motivation. Another one, unfortunately, that I don't know, kind of ticks me off a little bit, is kind of like, let me be a youth pastor so this can kind of extend my adolescent years, and I can have an excuse to do all these crazy, youthful things, and not really, I can kind of put off growing up a little bit. And that's, neither one of those are very good. But one of the things that I seem to be able to connect as I interact with people is the I don't know, I don't want to sound judgmental or anything, but there seems to be kind of a question in my mind for some that I see. What was your motivation to get involved in youth ministry in the first place? Because I think I might be able to kind of connect those dots with the lack of tact that you have, the lack of maturity that you have. And I understand that we're all on this road, right? We're all on this progression. We learn as we go, and and you can chalk a lot of stuff up just to just sheer an experience, but there seems to be this connection between maybe a false indicator of this is what God wants me to do, along the lines of, man, I'm just a jerk when it comes to dealing with people, or I don't have any kind of social grace, or I'm not able to pick up on those cues when you're having a conversation, or I don't know how to resolve a conflict in a way that is amicable with people. I don't know how to enter into a difficult conversation. So I don't know. Off the top of my head, those are some of the first thoughts that come to mind when I think of, to me, are essential people skills that I've witnessed firsthand. Some youth leaders seem to be lacking in.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. As you're talking, Jarrett, reminds me of when my first year of getting involved in youth ministry was as the guy. And I was working at a small suburban church setting. And I remember distinctly having this conversation with a mom that I could have swore was so against me and the ministry and everything that I stood for. I remember walking away thinking, man, things would be so much better if I could just take my students and be isolated away from their families and their parents and everyone that ruins everything. And like you said, there's kind of that naivety of being new into youth ministry that kind of facilitates that. Yeah. But I think there's also just a lack of understanding in how to have those tough conversations with people who are parents or farther along in parenting or older, what have you. Trevor, can you just address that for a moment of just maybe even some of the points that you mentioned in your book of, man, as a new youth pastor, a younger youth pastor, what are some of the important things they keep in mind when having conversations with difficult parents, volunteers, or even people that they don't see eye to eye with on church staff?
Right. There's a principle in the book that I basically call practice empathy. And it's kind of a Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People kind of skill, where he says, seek first to understand, then be understood. And so I think that what's happening a lot of times is that whether it's a personality conflict or just simply the way that people try to get things done gets a little bit different. What's going on is you're just not seeing eye to eye. And so when you can kind of, empathy is basically sympathy on steroids. I mean, it's an intensification of sympathy. And so when I practice sympathy, I can just say, man, I feel bad for you. But with empathy, you're actually kind of almost getting inside their shoes. And so there, I was working at a little rural church up in Northern Virginia years and years ago. The daughter had gone home on a Wednesday night and told her dad. Now, dad wasn't at church, and he was kind of a mean-spirited guy. She goes home and tells her dad, Trevor said that I can't hang out with my friends anymore because they're not Christians. Now, I didn't say that, but that's what she heard me say. Okay, 7th grade girl goes home, tells dad. Dad's sitting at home drinking a beer on the couch. He goes and gets in the family minivan, comes burning up the road back to the church, pulls in, comes rumbling up the stairs, and comes in screaming obscenities. He's picking up chairs, throwing chairs at me. And I'm just backing up like, whoa, man, like, what's going on here? Let's talk about this. And he's like, I'm not interested in talking. You're going to pay for that. Anyway, because my daughter hates God now. Well, I don't know if that's my fault or your fault. But so what you got to do is you basically, you got to stop. And I think that a lot of times when you kind of get crossways with people, especially on your church staff, I work on a pretty big staff right now, and sometimes different silos can form, different cliques can form. And just like a student trying to show up in a new small group, it can be hard to kind of feel like you fit in. And so part of it is just, making a conscious decision to have healthy relationships on your staff team. But when you do have those moments of tension, it's not even really conflict, it's just tension. You got to come together, and I think you just name what's going on. And so you say, hey, look, you know what? The template that I offer in the book is simply, I feel and then insert, whatever it is, I feel left out when you don't invite me to lunch, because, I want to be part of the team too. And so what happens is, instead of attacking a person's character, like, you're so, self-absorbed, or you're, all about you, what you don't attack their character, you just attack you're not even attacking, you're just dealing with the issue. You're dealing at the issue level rather than the character level. And I think that Kerry Newhoff, I don't know if anybody follows his blog or not, but he's working. He pastors a church called Connexus Church up in Canada, doing a lot of great work in terms of church revitalization and that kind of stuff. And he's led some amazing stuff. But he's got some recent blog posts about it. You might be able to track down a link somewhere for it. But it's But he makes a big point about attacking the issue rather than the person. And I think that's a key distinction. But as it comes to empathy, and it comes back to that dad who's throwing chairs, look, the real issue is he's dealing with some insecurity. He's dealing with some things that are going on under the surface there. And so my job then is hopefully to kind of be patient enough and empathetic enough to see things from his perspective and say, if I was in your shoes, I might in fact do the same thing. I think that takes you forward pretty far.
Yeah. I think that's a huge thing in dealing with that right in front of your face type conflict, even that simple phraseology and being able to insert that and saying, if I was in your shoes, I would feel the same way. And switching gears from two people who are facing off like this into asserting yourself alongside them and moving towards the right direction is huge. And that's a big people skill that we as pastors have to have.
And here's another thing too, is that when you're in kind of a discussion with somebody and you really feel like, like you're making a good point here, and they're just not picking up on it, or, they clearly have a different, perspective on what's going on. One of the key phrases, I think this phrase is magic. I mean, just in terms of gaining you some credibility, is just say, listen, I could be wrong, but here's what I think. Because what you're doing right there at the outset is you're saying, you're not taking the, you're not on a soapbox. You're not saying, you're wrong. You're saying, listen, I admit that I could be wrong. Right? Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I see. And that will just open up a door to a whole lot of, I think, healthy discussion to be able to move whatever issue it is forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I could be wrong, but it might be your child's insistency of selling drugs at our youth groups that caused him to be kicked out.
That's right.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
That's right, because you're that's right. You're opening up the door to the possibility that you're wrong. So you're not taking the, I know everything. I'm the guy who knows it all. You're not taking that approach, because that turns a lot of people off. So here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm thinking. I could be wrong, but what do you say?
I love that. Those are some really great tools and simple tools. And if you weren't paying attention, you'd almost miss those because of how simple they seem on the surface and yet how powerful they are. And so that first one, it sounds like, man, if I was in your shoes, I think I might feel the same way. And hey, I could be wrong, but here's how I see it. And those are two very powerful tools.
That's right. Because I think our tendency is to bow up. Our tendency is to dig in, create make the conflict bigger than what it ought to be. And then you wind up in a situation where you don't speak to each other.
Yeah.
So it's not that big of a deal. Open up the door to the possibility. I could be wrong. Try to see things from other people's perspective. That's exactly right.
That's huge. Well, as we're talking about this, it becomes really clear that most often our lack of people skills, or even a deficiency in one area of a people skill, becomes most clear in situations of conflict. And conflict hits us in all kinds of different ways, whether it's between parents and us, or even a student and us, or we see conflict between students and a volunteer, and the list goes on, and we can take that to a staff level. When dealing with conflict, you mentioned empathy, and you mentioned how to kind of make a point without making another person the point. When dealing with conflict, what's important for us to remember as we enter into conflicting situations? I guess kind of what I'm getting at here, what I'm asking is, it seems to me that a lot of conflict can get escalated to a direction you don't want it. Because of struggles with how someone interprets that conflict affecting their identity and
That's right.
how they perform in those things.
The first thing that I would say to do is never engage in any sort of confrontation or, conflict resolution through email or through text message, because there's body language, there's visual cues that you just don't have access to. Emojis have taken us a little bit further down the road, so that you can nuance some things, add a little wink, add a little smile, add a little thumbs up, to just say, hey, I'm being playful here. Don't take me serious. This has helped my wife and I very much. honey, I didn't mean it like that, because if all you get is just this flat, bare text, it's about like when people read the Gospels and they see, Jesus has got some pretty nice jabs in there, and he's got some humor going on, some wordplay, some, all sorts of things. But, you just don't get that on the flat page. And so I would just say that, gosh, you've got to get in the same room. And also I would say, I think that, people, for the most part, they don't want to have unhealth. Your volunteers, they want to do a good job. Your students want to get along with their parents. Their parents want to get along with their students. And so you're just assuming the best about people. And that's going to take you pretty far because it won't make you quite as defensive. And, and then once you're in the same room, then you just got to get that issue out on the table. And it feels very hard, and I'm not, Gordon Ramsay. I'm no conflict, junkie. I mean, I don't want to, create conflict or whatever. My personality is very agreeable. It's, I would rather kind of reach some consensus and kind of move on, even if it's not quite what I would. So I'm very agreeable. However, I do understand that there are times when, probably the worst thing I can do for the relationship is to agree. And I'm going to have to call the person in and we're going to have a conversation. I mean, whoever's married knows this happens. Whoever has kids, this happens. You got to sit down and you say, here's what's going on, family meeting, here's what's going on. And then at some point you do the, I feel, when you, because, and then you just got to be quiet and let them talk. And what's going to happen is they're going to shed light on all the other different aspects of the story. And so, to pick back up on the example of a person who gets left out when the staff goes to lunch, it's kind of like, they're sitting there for that hour stewing over it. Like they're so insensitive. They left me out. They probably don't even like me. Well, instead of that, it's probably you had gone to the restroom. They didn't think about you. They were just headed out, but you're not going to know. And then what happens is because you've just left that issue unaddressed, it just has this tendency to build and swell, until, tell you what, you can find yourself very quickly into a situation. So my brother and my dad, not Christian guys, but my brother and my dad, they had this point of conflict 9 years ago. Okay. They have not spoken to each other in 9 years, not even a phone call, not even a letter. And it all got started because of a little chink in the armor. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, he won't call, they won't call. And because it was just this unresolved conflict, and here's the weird thing. It all started because of a misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so many things happen like that. And you see two people who work in the same church proclaiming the same gospel and proclaiming even the same vision of how to carry out that gospel, who won't even make eye contact with one another in the halls, let alone have a conversation in a staff meeting or about ministry or anything like that.
That's exactly right. And odds are good that if you could get them in a room and each person could explain what they feel like is going on from their perspective, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And you could extend some grace. And, people are human. And so you've got to allow for lapses in judgment and for misunderstandings. But when you believe the best about somebody, then you believe that even though it didn't quite maybe go as I expected it to this past time, we can all learn from our mistakes and hopefully it'll go better next time. And so part of conflict resolution is to maybe agree upon 2 or 3 different ways that we can maybe prevent this thing from happening, in the future. And that's basically, that takes suggestions from both parties. And you say, man, I really hate that it kind of got here. How can we prevent this from happening again? And that, even as a leader, if you got people on your team, that's a conversation, if they fail to perform or they underperform or they miss the deadline or whatever, this is just good leadership. And so you just call them in and you say, listen, here's what happened. Okay. I feel like this job wasn't very important to you because you missed the deadline. How did this happen? And they're going to tell you, well, I got behind, my car got in the shop. I didn't have it. My computer, broke, whatever. And you say, okay, well, how can we keep this from happening again? Next time.
Mm-hmm. That's huge. That's awesome. Well, let me transition a little bit. I'd love to spend a little bit of time on kind of the other side of people skills and the benefits that they bring, aside from just conflict resolution and walking through some of the difficult things. Because as I understand people skills and how I've leveraged them in my life, one of the benefits is man, you can attract a lot of people to your ministry. And one of the most common issues that I hear about from other youth workers is, I wish we could get more volunteers. I wish we had more help. I wish someone would be interested in interning for me. I wish parents would want to be more involved, and all of those things. So what is your insight on leveraging people skills and how that can influence the volunteer pool, the intern pool, or even getting more parent involvement?
Yes. So, I mean, the key is you got to be a positive person. I mean, there's a place for melancholy. There's a place for introversion. Some of the best pastors I know are introverts, and part of what makes them so amazing at pastoring is that they don't feel like they got to talk all the time. And so introverts can be amazing pastors, but even if you're introverted, you got to have a smile. You know, there's so many guys who walk around frowning all the time, and nobody wants to be around that kind of guy. I don't want to be involved in that guy's ministry if he's just Debbie Downer, all the time. And I reference Debbie Downer from Saturday Night Live in the book, because she's just that person who is negative about everything. So she's at Disney World, she's negative. She's at Thanksgiving dinner, this big spread full of, the stuffing's dry, and so you got to put on a smile. You got to be a positive person. And I think that type of positivity just exudes from you. And as people, that's contagious. People like to be around people who are moving and shaking and making things happen. And when you're that kind of person, the odds are, it's not 100% connection, but the odds are a whole lot higher that your ministry is going to be filled with those kind of people, because, one of the insights of John Maxwell is just that, level 6 leaders attract, level 5, people, and level 8 leaders attract level 7 people. And so the better you are at I think even managing yourself, the better it is, the better the kind of people are that you're going to attract. And so, one of the neat things that I've seen as I've kind of gotten better as a leader is I find that the quality of the leaders who want to work with me continues to go up. And so sometimes I turn around and I'm like, man, I can't believe, he wants to be on my team. I can't believe she wants to be on my team. But again, I think that it really does start with, being positive, walking around, it's so simple though. I feel bad even saying it, a smile, but you carry yourself, with presence and authority, and you just want to communicate through all those nonverbal cues. Man, this ministry matters. This ministry is doing something, and I'm happy to be here, because I think that a lot of guys wear it on their sleeve. They might be in a church that they don't. This is a question I like to ask different pastors to kind of get access to what's really going on. Would you attend your church if they didn't pay you to work there? I think that a lot of guys would not. And I think that they don't really enjoy being there. And I think that they're just slugging through it. And if that's the attitude, if that's the demeanor, then who wants to work with that kind of person? Not parents, not volunteers. And eventually your students pick up on the fact that you don't believe in it. You don't believe in them. You believe in God, of course, but you don't believe in the church's mission. You don't believe in who they are as students. And so they're going to leave you too. And, that's tough.
That's huge. Trevor, you mentioned something with the conflict thing, and something that I think is going to become more and more relevant for the younger generation and those just entering into youth ministry from a leadership standpoint. And that's the idea of personal contact. And this also plays out in a big way with volunteers and developing and building up your staff. It's not enough to just send text messages or emails. And so much of how we communicate can be done electronically, to where we're almost thinking that it's irrelevant to actually meet and spend time with people. How important is it for us to leverage people skills to develop our team?
Yeah, let me tell you this. Just recently, I had gone to almost an exclusive leadership training video format. Okay. So that I felt like, man, nobody can get to the centralized location. It's inconvenient, all these different reasons. And so I really adopted almost full board, and Download Youth Ministry does a great job with these video, online video trainings. And so I just was content with emailing those videos out. Big mistake. Because you can get away with it for a while. But what happened is about 6 months into this, kind of revamped training process where I'm just going to send you a Dropbox link, you check out the video. I noticed, people kind of falling out. My volunteers, the commitment level was dropping. And I think it's because they didn't sense the level of buy-in. They didn't feel the level of the team, they didn't feel any unity, any community with the other team members because everything was just so siloed and isolated. And so, that's been a big, error of mine that we're trying to, come back and correct. Also, kind of in the larger, I work with a North Point church strategic partner. And so, one of the things that we're finding and kind of the language that we're using around here now is that you can't really rely on video is very impersonal. And sometimes, especially in regard to training and relationships, it's very personal. And so at some point you got to sit across the table from somebody eyeball to eyeball and have a conversation. Matter of fact, one of my volunteers, he runs, I think we're on Zoom right now, but he basically goes around and sells like webinar, WebEx, GoToMeeting, Citrix kind of stuff. And this was crazy because, one of their big things is, hey, we're going to get you. It's just like being there. It's just like sitting across the table from a guy. And you know what he did? Last week he was traveling around visiting all the customers. I said, well, why would you do that? Why don't you just use your own technology? And he said, because at the end of the day, we all recognize that there's something about sitting across the table, looking the guy in the eye and having a conversation. So tools are great. Technology is pushing us forward. Things like this are amazing because, you and I, California to Georgia, we can communicate. Jerry, where are you?
We're just south side of Richmond, Virginia.
There you go. So you're in Richmond, Virginia. And so the fact that we can kind of pull this little trifecta is absolutely amazing. Technology allows us to do that, but it can very quickly become a bad substitute for the hard work of building relationships.
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your heart about this book. If you have not picked it up, they can pick it up on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And
that's right. It's
once again. Go
say
ahead.
that. Yeah, it's on Amazon, on Kindle. It's on paper. I got the paperback hanging out right here. It should be up on Audible anytime now. So if you're an audiobook kind of guy, it should be there. And, I just enjoy the process of creating, of writing. And, one of the neat things about it is that all these skills, these aren't complicated, but what happens is that they kind of drift from front of mind. And so for me, I developed as a leader, I developed as a ministry leader, as a pastor, even as a person, by going back and kind of bringing together these skills. And so it's funny. So for me, writing basically takes things that have kind of drifted off from my mind and it brings them back front and center again. And now all of a sudden I can't be a jerk to anybody because I wrote a people skills book.
Yes, you are held accountable now by the fact that you titled a book. So that gives me an idea. If I ever write a book, it will be a low bar book. I don't have to raise to meet that or anything. Thank you so much for taking the time, Trevor. Jerry, thank you for being here. Anything that you wanted to ask before we get out of here? We got about 4 minutes before they cut our meeting off.
Yeah, Trevor, I would really love to know if you had like a particular part or section or chapter of the book that you especially really enjoyed.
Yes. The part that I like the most is about building relationships. So basically what I did was I sat down with a notepad and I felt like what are the keys to ministry success that I feel like I can contribute to guys coming, down, the guys who are less far along than I am in youth ministry. Sat down with a notepad, started jotting down, what are some skills related to just people and conversations and all these kinds of things. And what happened is they eventually kind of formed, there were some common threads there. And so the book basically broke down into 11 ways to make a great first impression, 11 ways to have great conversations, and 11 ways to build, lasting relationships. The relationship thing for me is huge because I think that a lot of us will settle. Ministry guys are busy. Youth pastors are busy. A lot of people everywhere. It's very easy to kind of get secluded or withdraw and that sort of thing. And I think that it's so important to keep building relationships with people beyond just that surface level. And that's, that happens when you make investments in the relationship, when you're earning trust. Young Life has a great statement about earning the right to be heard. And those are things that, when you're in the grind of weekly ministry, you're trying to create programs, you're trying to write your message, you got to go lead this meeting, your senior pastor calls you and he wants you to, do this thing because you're the youth guy. I think that of all those things, and of course your wife and kids want you too. And so of all those things, you can make a great first impression, you can have great conversations, but those are all to the end of, or for the purpose of building those great relationships. And those relationships are what's going to sustain you in ministry. When you're having a heck of a time, a bad week, or even a great week, who's going to celebrate with you? Who's going to pray for you? Man, those are the people who know you, that you've invested in those relationships. So to me, the real value in the book is that part 3, which is 11 ways to build lasting relationships.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate the time, and hopefully the other people who get to watch this after us will really enjoy it. I know I did. So
good.
Trevor, thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.